Welcome to the Monocle Banking Podcast, curated as always by Monocle Solutions, where we break down the complex, well, we try to at least, and bring you some clarity on the financial forces shaping our world. Now, exactly a year ago, CODI, the Corporation for Deposit Insurance, launched with a promise to protect depositors and strengthen trust in South Africa's banking system. Since then, we've seen CODI put to the test, most notably with the collapse of Itala, a state-owned bank that many now argue should never have been granted banking rights in the first place. So what did the past year teach us about depositor protection? Has CODI passed its first test? And what does this mean for the future of state-owned banks, financial stability and public trust? Stay tuned to find out. Well, I'm joined once again by Sabihah Mohamed, the founding CEO of CODI and the architect of South Africa's depositor safety net. Sabihah, great to have you back on, and hard to believe it's already been a year since we first spoke at the launch of CODI. Looking back over the last 12 months, how would you personally describe CODI's first year in action, both the highs and the lessons?
Well, Michael, I think it's been an action-packed year for us at CODI. We've achieved a lot. We did have some challenges in terms of the amount of work that there was to do, but I think we have risen to the occasion, and I'm very happy with the progress that we've shown in the past year.
Let's get straight into the elephant in the room. The failure of Itala, in many ways, it became CODI's first real-world test case. How did CODI respond to the situation, and what does it tell us about the importance of having a credible depositor insurance scheme in place?
Well, Michael, I should maybe just clarify that Itala was not a registered bank, and because of that, CODI did not have a role in Itala's situation that is happening. So CODI can only protect the depositors of a registered bank with a PA. So we always advise depositors to make sure that when they open an account, it's with a registered bank. So we do get many queries on the CODI inbox about the protection of Itala and CODI's role, but the answer is always the same. If you don't bank with a registered bank, CODI does not have a role, and the legislation is very clear on this.
In that case, do you think it exposes blind spots in the early framework or approach that we've taken here, or is it just a case of caveat emptor? Because Itala was certainly behaving as if it was a registered bank.
I think one must look at the background of Itala. They operated under an exemption from the Banks Act, which also meant that they could take deposits, but they would have not been a member of CODI. And that exemption expired in, I think it was December 2023, and they were supposed to pay back the depositors because they no longer had a license to take deposits. I think there are some lessons to be learned here, especially for CODI, just making sure that the public knows about where it's safe to put their money. We are definitely communicating more about the membership to CODI and what does it mean to bank with a registered bank, as well as the types of products that we cover. And I'm sure there will be further learnings from the Itala experience going forward. So we'll see how it evolves.
So when we look at, and the last time we spoke, you mentioned stokvels and informal beneficiary accounts. Does CODI's protection extend to those types of accounts? And when you look at the coverage that you've managed to achieve through the first 12 months of CODI, are you satisfied with the kind of depositor protection that you now offer?
Yes, so if I can explain, CODI does protect stokvels, but here also we must make sure that the public knows when they are part of a stokvel, they must make sure that it is a stokvel where the money is placed into a pooled group account at a bank. So what we've seen is, and many people have raised this with us, that someone who may be the treasurer will take the money and go put it in his bank account. In that case, CODI will not know that it's a stokvel account. So we will not know who to protect. We will assume that the account holder is the party that we must protect. So I think, firstly, when people want to participate in a stokvel, they must make sure that it's placed in a proper type of stokvel account at a bank. We do provide 100,000 Rand coverage per stokvel, and we will pay out to the people who have signing rights on the account. So they must also make sure that when they open that account, the details of those people have been recorded. And if there's more than one, they must all be recorded on the bank systems. For CODI then, if a payout were to happen, we would make sure that they're all present so that we distribute the money to the correct people, or that there's at least an affidavit from all the stokvel members that this is the person that they've chosen to receive the money. Also,
Yeah.
maybe just to add, you asked about the adequacy of the coverage. So in law, CODI has an obligation to every 5 years check that its coverage is adequate. So we have to follow a process whereby we look at firstly the limit of cover, so the 100,000, but also the scope of cover. So for example, we will in the next year or so look at cooperative financial institutions to do a feasibility study about including them as members of CODI because they're currently not members, but they do take deposits. We've also had lots of questions, why do CODI not cover e-money products? So we will do feasibility studies about these things to see, is it sufficiently large in South Africa for CODI to consider covering? And that would then be an expansion of the scope if we were to include them. But it is a legal requirement to assess it every 5 years, and obviously, if necessary, we would then have to amend the legislation accordingly.
Again, though, back to the role of CODI in communicating exactly who is covered and who isn't covered under the scheme to ensure that depositors make an informed decision. Does that ultimately rest with you? Is it a broader, SARB mandated thing? Is it an FSCA prudential thing? Who takes the lead here in ensuring there is a greater awareness amongst the depositing public? Because I think at the time, many, and as you rightly point out, had falsely assumed that CODI would have covered their deposits inside Itala.
I want to say it's a financial sector wide responsibility. In the past year, we've worked with the FSCA, we've worked with National Treasury at some of the initiatives that they've had. CODI itself does a lot of public awareness initiatives, interviews like this, TV interviews, we go to community events, but there's also the responsibility then on our member institutions, the banks. Legally, they are obligated to communicate about deposit insurance to their customers. They have to, for example, on either a branch or physical platform or electronic platform, show that they're a member of CODI and what we cover and not. They have to distribute brochures to their depositors. So these are legal obligations on the banks in terms of our deposit insurance framework. And I think most of the communication to the depositors will most likely be their banks because we did a survey, I think it was in 2019, to find out about the best channel of communication. And most of the depositors indicated that they prefer to hear from their bank
Yeah.
about these types of products. Yeah, so that's why we see the banks as one of our most effective channels, and we will continuously assess their compliance to these public awareness requirements and also look at, is it sufficient? So what we also have to do is every few years, I don't know if it's going to be every 4 or 5 years, we have to do a survey and benchmarking to see, are we spending our public awareness time and money in the right place? Do more people know about CODI now than they did before?
Yeah.
So we have to do such an assessment to see if it was actually worthwhile. Do we need to make adjustments? So that is happening. I've also mentioned that we worked with the FSCA, so there's quite a lot of collaboration with the FSCA. They communicate about CODI. We do attend and participate in events. So Money Savings Week, there was a CODI presence, and we focused on Stockfile specifically last year. So there's quite a lot of initiatives. I think it is something that will take time. So we're also looking at how do we do it going forward? Are there additional channels that we've not considered before? But it is a process. South Africa has a lot of news, so we're always competing with all of these happenings.
And listen, we know trust is the currency of banking at the end of the day. And I guess one of the benchmarks by which one would measure the effectiveness of CODI is a measurable improvement in public awareness and depositor confidence since the launch of CODI, especially in communities that are most affected by the likes of an Atala collapse, for example. What are you doing in order to measure that public awareness and that depositor confidence from launch to where we are now and maybe into the future?
So at the moment, so we work very closely with the South African Reserve Bank's communications division, and they have started through social media doing surveys to determine what does the public know about CODI so that we can have more targeted communication going forward. So that is at the moment the only channel that we're using, but like I mentioned earlier, at some point, and I think we'll take part in the SARB survey that takes place every few years, there will be a nationwide survey just to determine how effective our public awareness initiatives have been. So that is something that has not taken place yet. I think it's only in the next year or two, but that will probably be the bigger exercise that we'll undertake.
A year in, how are you benchmarking yourself against your international peers, particularly in emerging markets, for example? Are we still aligned with the IATA principles? And what are the big lessons for you that you've learned over the last 12 months?
We've actually embarked on quite a number of initiatives in the past year. So one of the most important aspects for a deposit insurer is access to depositor data. So we've been implementing a system. We did a foundational system for April last year, and we've built on that. And by the 1st of October this year, our updated system that will give us the detailed depositor information will be live. And then each bank will have to submit the detailed depositor information to CODI. And this will definitely help us if anything were to happen, if a bank failed, that we would be able to execute our functions faster because we'll have access to that information. We're also participating in IARI's regional committee, the Africa Regional Group, where we engage with the other African deposit insurers about their practices and we learn from them. We also started becoming members of the IARI working groups and technical committees. So we're also learning from them and hoping to influence as well. And then IARI's core principles as part of our strategy for the next 5 years is to assess ourselves against the core principles. They're busy updating them. I think they'll publish the updated core principles by the end of this year. So we're going to benchmark ourselves against that, identify the areas of non-compliance, and then have an action plan to address those areas. But it's something that we look at, I want to say continuously. I mean, the core principles are there for a reason. So they give you an indication of what's the requirements for you to be an effective deposit insurer. And we strive to be compliant as much as we can and at least develop a plan for those areas where we may not meet the requirements fully. So there's a lot of work focusing on this. We do also engage with our counterparts on a more individual basis. So we recently signed an MOU with the Namibia Deposit Guarantee Authority. And even there, we learn from each other. There's so many ways of setting up a deposit insurance scheme and implementing. So we learn what we can from our counterparts in that regard as well.
When we look now at the funding model, and I know last year when we spoke about it, it was heavily consulted on, carefully structured to balance affordability and effectiveness. Have any adjustments been made to CODI's initial funding model or assumptions based on the year's experience that you've had?
The funding model is currently still the same. We do annually assess the size of the fund liquidity tier. So that's the bigger portion of the deposit insurance fund. So we do that in the fourth quarter of the calendar year, and then we publish the requirement for banks on the SARB website because they need that for budgeting purposes. So essentially still the same. We did revise our target fund size from 4% to 3%, and the intention is that we will start changing the composition of the deposit insurance fund. So lowering the size of the loans that we get from banks, but increasing the premiums that we get from banks. So we will still consult on what that will look like. So it's still in the initial phases, but it is just to reduce the dependency on the loan funding and also to make it more affordable for the bank. So it doesn't mean that if the loan funding decreases by 0.5% that the premiums will go up at the same level, but we're looking at what would be sustainable over the long term for CODI as well as for the banks. And I mean, that funding model was built in that way specifically to reduce the cost on the banking sector as well as the depositors, because banks an interest on that loan. So it sets some of the deposit insurance costs off.
How much has been accumulated in the deposit insurance fund over the year, and how is the investment strategy evolving now that you've moved from interim to longer term fund managers?
So at the moment, I think as at 31st of March, the fund size was 19.7 billion. At the moment, the funds are still invested in a SARB call account, and the interest that we earn, we pay to the banks. But we are busy appointing external fund managers, which should be in place fairly soon. We have developed an investment policy in line with the IARI guidance, but also looking at what would work for us because we do need to earn additional return to be able to pay the banks for the loans.
Yeah.
And we've also developed the investment guidelines. So we've done all the preparatory work for these external fund managers to be appointed and take over the management of the fund. And because of that, and hopefully we'll earn a little margin for CODI as well, we will then be changing the composition of the deposit insurance fund. So it's been a process, but we're getting there. And I'm hopeful that by the end of this year, we'll have more productive investments, if you like.
And as you say, eventually reducing contributions once that target funding level is reached and then it tapers off over time. How are banks responding to their contribution requirements, particularly the loan portion? Are you getting any pushback, or has the model proven to be as bank-friendly as you had hoped?
Well, Michael, to be honest, this funding model was based on proposals from the banks, and I think it was in an attempt to reduce the cost of what we initially proposed, a very big expense through the income statement. So I think it's working for them. We haven't had much pushback in terms of agreeing to this proposal. We had to sort out the nitty-gritty, the details of what we'll pay them and so on. But I think it's a unique funding model and it works well. So we'll adjust it, but in consultation with the banks. And I think it was perfect for what South Africa needed last year to set up a deposit insurance scheme.
When you do stress testing, I mean, ultimately, you don't ever want to really be in a situation where you've got a major bank failure, but I'm sure you must run scenarios and do stress testing. Have you done any live simulations or desktop exercises to test CODI's readiness to act in a big resolution scenario?
So yes, we have. So we've done various desktop simulations where we look at the failure of one or more banks and what the impact would be on the deposit insurance fund. So I might maybe also just mention that we've got the 19.7 billion in the deposit insurance fund, but we also have an emergency funding undertaking from the South African Reserve Bank, if that is not enough. So if it's a larger bank, we do have that facility then with them to provide the additional funding against the collateral from CODI then. So we've done that. We do it for all of the banks that there are some concerns about. We also combine them just to make sure that we sufficiently fund it and also to know if we're not, what should we do. In the past year, we focused a lot of our work on preparing for a resolution, so developing processes, templates, documents, contracts that we could then basically just execute. So a lot of the work for deposit insurer is in the preparations. We also recently had a simulation facilitated by the World Bank, testing the resolution and deposit insurance framework, the coordination and decision making, and I think it went quite well. Obviously, there are always learnings from these types of exercises, and we will implement action plans to address any shortcomings that there were. But for us at CODI, continuous testing is part of what we do. So you establish something and then you build on it and see how you can do it better in future. But having that foundation in place is critical. So we're also looking at other processes. So if a bank were to fail, we would appoint a payout agent bank. So we're in the process of finalizing a panel of payout agent banks. So if any bank were to fail, we would then reach out to the panel to find out which of the banks on the panel would be able to facilitate the payout. So that process is almost at the end as well. And then we'll test that as well. So, how quickly would we be able to get the information to that bank? Or how quickly would they be able to onboard it to their system and be able to give the depositors access to their funds? But we're also looking at how can we improve our processes and our systems to do it quicker from the CODI side as well. So a lot of the preparatory work is also going into data quality at banks. So making sure that when banks actually do their what we call SCV calculation, so it's Michael's got 5 accounts at this one bank, and we need to see them all together to know what is the total covered balance for Michael. So we do a lot of testing of that. So because we don't really have the system at the moment, we've been doing manual checks, and so we ask the banks to submit their calculations to us so that we can see. We almost do a reasonability check to see if they included all of the relevant depositors, did they apply the rules according to the regulations, and then if they didn't, we monitor them until we feel that the issue has been resolved. So in future, when we've got the system, it will be even easier for us to do that. But in addition to that, we've also realized that there is a gap in our legislative framework. And we have now requested an amendment to the legislation to give CODI the power to appoint a third party to go and do an investigation or on-site examination at a bank. So by doing that, they would actually then check, did the bank actually include the information accurately? So does the depositor exist? Is there evidence that there's an account? Because CODI can only pay out to people that have been verified. So that is quite a big focus for us at the moment, and we're looking at all kinds of mechanisms of how can we make sure that the information is accurate and valid for us to use when we have to use that information to support the resolution. This is a big focus for us, as you can probably hear.
Yeah.
So I think we'll continue looking at how do we do it better but there is a lot of groundwork that we still have to put in place. But we do have processes for if anything were to happen tomorrow, we've got processes in place. It may be a little bit slower than the fancier versions which we're working on, but there should be comfort to depositors that we've got processes in place and we will be able to execute our function and protect the depositors of a registered bank that fails.
And, giving yourself some more teeth, as you say, to go and investigate is certainly important. That legislative process, any idea on a timeline until you have that in place? I recall when we last spoke, you were targeting full implementation of the single customer view data system. Was it by October this year?
Yes.
Yeah. Are you on track
and we're
with
still
that?
on track.
Yeah.
Yes, look, I think there's been a lot of work and workshops with the banks just to make sure that everyone knows what is expected, especially the smaller banks. So we initially had some difficulties with them because many of them did not have systems where information was kept electronically. So for them, we had to develop a platform to assist them.
Wow.
So we've been having a lot of meetings with them just to make sure that they're actually capturing that information now on the system. So they have made wonderful progress, I must say. And I think even they will be on track for the 1st of October requirements. But we do have monthly workshops with the banks now just to make sure that everyone knows what is expected. I think we're starting simulations, if you like, in June just to test the actual submissions. And we also need to make sure that we've got sufficient capacity if all banks submitted the same detailed voluminous information to CODI within the first 2 weeks of October. So there's a lot of work going into this, but we're on track, and I think we'll definitely make it. We don't actually see any other option as meeting that timeline. So I think we'll be fine. We've put in the work, we've consulted, we collaborate with the banks, and everything is on track at the moment.
It shows you how much work actually is going on behind the scenes, just listening to you talk about all of these operational and legislative and other projects that you're working on behind the scenes to ensure that we build and improve upon CODI from its initial conception. And I know the last time we spoke about this long journey from concept to implementation, now that CODI has been live for 12 months, what's been the biggest surprise? Maybe something you couldn't have foreseen during the design phase that emerged for you over the last year?
I think I've realized the importance of communication. I think in marketing, they always say you have to communicate something 7 times before it lands. And that definitely is true. So, I mean, even though we've had sessions with the banks before CODI became operational, after CODI became operational, there were still things that we did not expect after CODI became operational. Banks had to comply with our requirements. So we dealt with it. But it also made me realize that you really have to continuously communicate. You may feel like you're repeating yourself a lot, but it is necessary because every time someone else hears something different, so it takes a couple of messages to really get the core message across to everyone. And even then, you still have to make sure that they understand the message. So I think communication and stakeholder collaboration is probably one of the critical aspects for any organization, not just the deposit insurance scheme.
Then finally, for the kind of average depositor listening today, what's the one thing you wish they knew about CODI that they might not, given what you've just said about the importance of communication and socializing something that is so new into the marketplace?
I think it's important that they know, if they've got money at a registered bank, it is protected by CODI, and the money is in the deposit insurance fund. It's ready for use. We've got our processes in place. We've got all of the relationships in place to be able to execute if we needed to do a payout, for example. But I want to give them comfort that we are there to protect their funds. They don't need to stress if they hear rumors about a bank or so on. The money is safe and they will be protected if anything happens. It's very unlikely for banks to fail in South Africa, but if it happens, they will be protected.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Sabihah Mohamed. We wish you well in the next 12 months. Lots that you've got on the go. The CEO of CODI reflecting on a watershed first year, the start of a new era in South Africa's financial safety net parlance. As South Africans, we may not think about deposit insurance until something goes wrong. But as we've just heard, when it does, it's vital to know that someone does have your back. But make sure you are transacting with a registered bank and a bank that is covered by CODI. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, leave us a review and share with a friend or colleague who cares about the future of our financial system. Until next time, I'm Michael Avery and this has been the Monocle Banking Podcast.